Brian Kelly says, quote, "We are not in the market of buying players." If anybody's going to be stepping on that soapbox, I don't think Brian Kelly's the one to do it.
You are Locked On ACC, your daily podcast on the Atlantic Coast Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Shout out to the everydayers for making Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. We're free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Alex Donno from Locked On Canes. He is Kenton Gibbs from Locked On Wolfpack. On this episode, we will be talking about post-spring football ACC power rankings. Some of these teams may not be belonging this high in the rankings. There is a distinction in recruiting and in the transfer portal, something only Miami and Florida State have done within the ACC. We will talk about that, but we have to start with Brian Kelly's soapbox quote from the other day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. So, Kenton, Brian Kelly, and I know he's not an ACC head coach. There are ACC tie-ins here. Brian Kelly of LSU, who LSU on the surface, it looks like they have a defensive line problem. They were very aggressive in at least hosting transfer portal defensive tackles for visits. They didn't land the guys that they hosted. Some of their top targets were Damonic Williams, who ended up going to Oklahoma, Simeon Barrow, who ended up going to Miami. That's one ACC tie-in right there. And in a recent interview, Brian Kelly was asked, hey, where are you right now with defensive line recruiting? He says it hasn't fared well, quite frankly, because we are selling something a little bit differently. We are not in the market of buying players, he says. When you hear that from Brian Kelly, what are your thoughts, Kenton?
This is so interesting. This is so fascinating because you aren't in the business of buying players. But Donno, what's one of the features of team facilities that I make fun of the most? What's the thing that I constantly talk about? If your players need this thing, they're not going to be good football players. Lazy rivers. You know why I make fun of lazy rivers being in school so much?
Why?
LSU has a lazy river. That's a pretty big deal to their school.
That's right.
I'm pretty sure, I'm not 1,000% sure on this, but I'm pretty sure Bama has one as well. And my point in saying all of that is you drop money into all of this dumb stuff. I wish we had a bleep button because I would say what I really want to say. It's a four-letter word that rhymes with pit. But you drop money into all of this dumb stuff and you sit here and you pay your players too. You had Odell Beckham before you were there walking up and down the sidelines giving $1,000 handshakes to guys after the national championship, and you are the school to say, we don't buy players. Baby, you're bitter. You're angry. You're upset. What's on your heart? What's on your heart? Well, again, if there was any big school coach that could sit on that, I think maybe Dabo is the only one that has that authority. But you, Brian, listen, your outrage, your moral outrage here is as fake as your Southern accent when you said that you were happy to be part of LSU family, whatever the hell that is. It's embarrassing. Buck up, win the recruiting battles, do what you need to do to win the recruiting battles, or shut the hell up. Those are my options for him. Because this is embarrassing. It's the new nature of the game. I'm sorry that you now have to give the players the money instead of giving facilities the money. I'm sorry that you now have to, make sure that your players are compensated instead of giving them a spaceship locker room where, the young man that got drafted out of Texas was looking around Kansas City's locker room like, oh, I'm so disappointed. This is not that. You got to pay your players now. I'm sorry to tell you, Brian. It's part of the game.
You hit something on the head there that if I think really the one coach in major college football who has been a very successful head coach. I think the one guy who could step on that soapbox, and he has, is Dabo Swinney, right? Because
Yeah, for sure.
That's the only coach that I can think of in a major Power 4 program who literally is not in the business of buying players, because he doesn't embrace NIL and he has zero embrace for the transfer portal, does not bring in transfers. And then the other parts of the hypocrisy with Brian Kelly is, you talk about not only pouring money into facilities, which is something he's very willing to do, he's also very willing to take big direct deposits for his own check, because last I checked, Brian Kelly is on a 10-year contract that guarantees him $95 million. And with incentives, some of those are easier to reach than others. With incentives, I think it could be north of $100 million that he ends up making at LSU. So you got a $95 million man saying we're not in the business of buying players. Now, I think, someone in the media who broke this down very well and clearly was Andy Staples of On3. I think he brought up a good point on what Kelly was doing with that interview. He's very much pandering to the anti-NIL crowd. And that's a big faction of the college football fans. That even the anti-NIL crowd are like smart enough to see through it, that he's being a little disingenuous here, but he's pandering to that anti-NIL crowd, because there's a portion of college football fans out there who love to hear quotes like that. That's right. We're not buying players. We still believe in amateurism. Coach, I'm so glad you're standing up for what's right and for the college football that I love, despite the fact that, it's a little bit disingenuous coming from him. But, to a point, and maybe Kelly just didn't want to articulate it this way, or he thought it would sound more powerful if he said we're not, in the market of buying players. But okay, if you want to say, hey, we thought with these specific defensive linemen, maybe the juice wasn't quite worth the squeeze. Maybe it wasn't quite worth spending as much as they wanted or as much as these other teams spent on them. I think people could respect that to an extent. I mean, it's not as if that would make the players look any worse than what he said. We're not in the market of buying players. That basically tells you these guys were out for the money and we were not willing to pay them. So maybe he could have just said, in reality, Kenton, that, hey, maybe we just thought these particular defensive linemen were not worth as much money as they wanted. So we're moving on. That's probably what really happened.
And here's my final thing on this whole diatribe here. I don't understand why. Sure, you'll win over Jimmy in Ruston, Louisiana, who was already a Tiger fan with this. Sure, you'll win over Bobby in Omaha, who likes college basketball more than the NBA because they just play the game the right way. You'll win over those guys, but here's the problem. Here's the problem that you run into. At the end of the day, does Jimmy and Ruston or Bobby in Omaha, do they suit up for you? Are they going to help you out? You need,
their defensive line is so thin, they might need those guys to suit up at D-tackle. And
guess what? If you've got a 5'10" pale guy who would throw out a hip trying to play pickleball on the field, trying to stop a platform block, oh, buddy, it's going to be a bad time for your linebackers. It's going to be a bad time for your DBs. There's going to be safety seeing elephants on parade, which means big bodies moving towards them down the field. And it's not just going to be a screenplay, which is we'll explain that later during the season. Don't worry. But long story short, your goose is cooked if that's your situation. Yeah. Again, if you lose the battle, you lose the battle. Bow out like a man. I understand that dirty macking is part of recruiting in college football, but generally the dirty macking happens when you're on the phone with recruits. Dirty macking to the world is just so. I want to say it's beneath you, Brian, but you've shown us the man that you are time and time and time again. And to be honest, again, he's a clown who wets the bed every big game, every chance he gets in a big game. You did it before NIL. You're going to do it after NIL. You're going to do it after you can pay your players up to $22 million for the roster. You are a habitual bedwetter. It's what you do. It's who you are. Don't blame NIL. Blame the fact that that's who you are. And it's easy to always blame externally. My problems are never my problems. It's always everybody else's fault. But I'll tell you this, when you refuse to acknowledge that you played a hand in it, guess what happens? You remove your power to fix it. 8-4 incoming for LSU, maybe 7-5. Congratulations, boys, because again, they're better than everybody else. They're the ones that don't pay players. They're so much more regal and pristine than the cleaner program, even though, didn't they just run out a national championship winning head coach for some off-the-field activities that were very salacious from a few guys? Yes. But I digress. Again, they're the bastion of cleanliness now that Brian Kelly's there.
Well, coming up next, something in recruiting in the transfer portal that only Miami and Florida State have done, and is this going to pay off for both of these programs in the long term? We are Locked On ACC. We're only getting started. You want to keep it locked. We're only getting started with Yahoo Finance, my friends. Let's get straight to the point. You want to grow your portfolio to deal with the rising costs of inflation, to pay off your debt or your mortgage, pretty much anything standing in the way of you and financial freedom, right? With Yahoo Finance, you can get access to the news, data, and tools that you need in order to help reach that financial freedom. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. Whether you're a seasoned investor or you're looking for that extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and data you need in one place. They are the #1 finance destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. Securely link your brokerage accounts for a unified view of your wealth, including 401k and other investments. A comprehensive perspective is what sets apart great investors, and it's how Yahoo Finance ensures you have the insight to look at your wealth in its entirety. With a community of over 90 million users each month, their real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com. The #1 financial destination, yahoofinance.com. That's yahoofinance.com. Thank you so much for making this episode of Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. It's called Locked On Sports Today, and it's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus the national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the Fire TV channels app. Alex Donno and Kenton Gibbs with you here on this episode of Locked On ACC. So, Kenton, you notice like the top programs in the country, the gold standards out there right now, like Georgia, Michigan coming off a national title, Alabama, obviously that with the coaching change, they had a lot of portal movement, but the top programs in the country still tend to focus more on high school recruiting than portal. Then there are certain programs that are like 80% portal. I think FSU was a little bit of an outlier with the season that they had last year, which was primarily through portal, but we're seeing the high school recruiting really waking up for Mike Norvell and company. In fact, Florida State and Miami are the only two teams in the ACC that have this distinction from last recruiting cycle, the class of 2024, into the transfer portal class of 2024, where the Miami Hurricanes and Florida State Seminoles are top 12 in both categories. They both have top 12 recruiting classes and top 12 transfer portal classes. Do you think that these programs, and obviously, on competitively, Florida State is ahead of Miami, or at least has been ahead of Miami, even as the Locked On Canes host? I fully admit that based on recent results, but do you think these programs can find like a perfect marriage of portal and recruiting, or does it have to trend more towards recruiting in the future?
This is a very interesting question, and it feels a little loaded, but I'll say this. It's more art. It's more art than science. I don't think that there's an exact number where it's like your tipping point for no longer being a good team is if 20% of your roster is made up of portal, because in portal, there's also different ways to do it. The way that Florida State did portal under Norvell was crucial because he understood chemistry. He understood culture. he understood that for the most part, even if your lineup is made up of a majority or of half portal guys, those portal guys need to be here for a while. Jared Verse had multiple years there. Jordan Travis, multiple years there. Johnny Wilson, multiple years there. There were very few guys that are out of their portal classes that is just one and done rentals.
Right.
So I think that you need to do both at a high level. And I think without both, you end up in a shaky situation where you end up very top heavy with no depth in terms of like a Clemson where you don't do portal at all. And you've just got like, hey, we've got to develop these high schoolers. And if that misses, then you're cooked. And it's also, it's like anything else, right? If you're saying, hey, I like somebody who's a homebody, right? I like a partner who's a homebody. Okay, great. If they stay home literally all the time, you're like, let's go for a walk in the park. Let's go for ice cream. Let's go to Steak 48 or something. I feel like getting dressed up going somewhere nice. And they're like, no, I want to stay home. You're like, okay. And if they're always like, no, I never want to be in the house. Every single day needs to be an adventure. You're going to get tired. It's the same way with roster management. You need to marry the two. You need to find that sweet spot. And that sweet spot is different for everybody. If you have, for example, if you're talking about NC State right now, the thing that I had most talked about they needed was to get a quarterback in recruiting because they kept doing these one and done rentals. It was Armstrong last year. It's going to be Grayson McCall this year. But both of those guys last year, and then they're gone. And I said they need a guy or a couple guys that's like, this is going to be our guy for the next 3, maybe 4 years. They went out and got that in C.J. Bailey in high school recruiting. And then you combine that with a Noah Rogers out of the portal, a Justin Jolie out of the portal, plenty of guys out of the portal, Jordan Waters and Hollywood Smothers. Everybody in that group I just named except Jordan Waters, they all have 3 to 4 years of eligibility left. So that's what I mean in terms of, I'm sorry, Jolie has 2 left, but you get what I'm saying. And everybody has a lot of eligibility left because, again, you marry the two. You don't just have hey, we got to go out every night. If we ever have a day where we're not going to Perry Steakhouse, I'm leaving. And you also need, don't want, hey, we got to stay in every night. I don't even want to go to McDonald's. I just want to stay in and cook every day. Neither one is great for you.
So, and then, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we look at the post-spring power rankings, but what Clemson is doing or not doing in the transfer portal where, Dabo Swinney, again, he's the guy who can step on that. We're not in the market of buying players. So like he can say that and mean it legitimately. They brought in 0 transfers and you just have to wonder. And it's not like they haven't lost any players. They've lost players, but they're not replacing them in the portal. They're only replacing players who transfer out through recruiting, which means, you're younger, your depth might be a little bit more questionable. I think there are certain areas like defensive line where Clemson will be in very good shape, despite some of the outgoing departures. But, do you look at them and do you really worry about their depth this coming season? Because I still think the biggest concern for me is I don't know if they have a bona fide star at quarterback with Cade Klubnik. But at the same time, you have to wonder if not dealing in the transfer portal at all in this day and age, can you really put out a championship caliber deep team without working the portal at all?
So the problems, okay. So let's discuss the problems with each because I believe that kind of feeds into Clemson's problems, and they are a very direct result of that. The problem that you're looking at here is if you go all portal, you risk losing your culture. You risk losing that. Hey, what makes us us? What's the essence of us? We don't know. We weren't from here. I played at West Virginia for 4 years. I don't know what the hell your culture is here. I just came to get this check and play some ball type of deal. You risk losing that to where, again, all these guys coming in from all these different places around the country, they don't know your culture potentially. And you have that, which, again, that's problematic for chemistry issues. And it creates a great haves and have-nots in your locker room, which is a little upsetting because if the haves step out of line one time, if you're paying a guy $1 million and he's not showing up to meetings or not doing something the right way, This guy that's making 10 bands and doing everything that he's supposed to. That's $10,000 for those of you who don't know what a band is. Those guys are disgusted and mad about that. So that's you have problems with stuff like that. And again, you have 1-year rentals, so you got to hope that all those old guys are ready to get in your system and play right away. That's the problem there. Now we talk about Dabo and them's problem on the side of the high school recruiting. Every recruit means so much more because every time you miss, you know that we have to wait 2 to 3 years to replace that young man. And as much as, here's the thing, you're right about Clemson's supposed to be in a good spot for D-line. I think they're 1 or 2 injuries away, even up front on D-line, where they have a ton of talent from having to have guys who have not played meaningful football at all have to play 40 snaps a game, which if you know anything about D-line, 40 snaps a game is a big time deal. So it's you're looking at a situation where with Clemson and not doing a ton in the portal like Miami and FSU, you're up against it. You're so tough up against it because, again, the portal should be used, in my opinion, to supplement and fill out where you need immediate help. Where you need to replace a Makuba, you need to have somebody where you're like, hey, this is a senior. We trust him. He was an all-conference guy. He destroyed the MAC conference. We're going to bring him down to the ACC to see how he does. You can't do that now. You're having a young man that you could say, he destroyed California high school football. We're going to bring him on down here, and he's been in the program for a year. We trust that he's good now. We trust that he's ready to do what needs to be done. So I think that the problem that Clemson has is not only with depth, but it's even with your starters. If they played no meaningful college football, I'm trusting you. When we're in live action and everything is flying at you and you feel like, oh, man, I don't know what's going on, you're going to settle down and play more experienced than you are, which, to be honest, I think that's why playing Georgia game 1 is one of the biggest mistakes they ever could have made. And I know that they did that and set that up before NIL is what it is now. But those young guys, I think those young guys are better served by getting their lab legs under them and figuring out and getting some confidence before they see their first real test per se than getting destroyed out the gates, because that's the Tom Izzo style of coaching where it's like, I'm going to put you through a gauntlet early and later we'll be all right. But it's like you can't do that in college football. College football doesn't give you throwaway games. And there's not a 64-team tournament where it's like, hey, when we get to the back end of the season, if we're playing our best ball, we'll be able to win the Natty still. No, you won't. You'll be able to win a Citrus Bowl. Congratulations.
Coming up next, looking through this CBS Sports post-spring football power rankings in the ACC, couple things got our attention. And it's not even just at the top of the rankings, something in the middle. And I think Kenton Gibbs might like this one. We'll talk about that and so much more when we come back on this brand new episode of Locked On ACC. Right after we talk about FanDuel. It's playoff time. Player props. I love going through these player props and having an amazing time every day at FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL. And FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 that you can bet on those spreads, money lines, player props, and so much more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Alex Donno from Locked On Canes, Kenton Gibbs from Locked On Wolfpack with you here on Locked On ACC. So, Kenton, this is adjusted power rankings from CBS Sports after, the transfer portal's not completely done, but it's, the dust is settling. And of course, everyone has finished their spring games. Before we take a look at the top of their ACC power ranking, where they have Florida State at 1, Clemson at 2, Miami at 3, I want to take a look at the middle. They give NC State some respect at number 4, but how about 5 and 6, Kenton? They've got Virginia Tech at 5, ranked ahead of Louisville at number 6. This might be the only publication that I've seen that actually considers Virginia Tech in front of Louisville. I wonder if this is a reaction or even overreaction to a lot of the negative headlines surrounding Louisville's transfer portal.
Oh, it absolutely is at least a reaction. Whether it's an overreaction is still to be seen. But I'll tell you this. I have said all offseason, Virginia Tech is my team to watch. Out of that, if somebody was to say,
I think you like this, yeah.
Those teams that are predicted to be at the bottom or whatever, or the lower middle part, Virginia Tech is a team that I've had circled for a while in terms of what they're bringing back, who they are, and the fact that Virginia Tech is regaining that culture. They're regaining that lunch pail mentality and all that good stuff. Because, even looking through the history now that I think about it, Virginia Tech has never been known as being the biggest, most physical team, but they have always out-schemed people and all that, which is, it's something that now I'm like, hey, I don't know if y'all noticed or not, Bud Foster ain't walking through that door. Get you some beef up front. Get you some massive young men to kind of man the fort there. But I do think that there's something weird about having Louisville at 6, because while I don't believe in Tyler Shuck, while I do think that he's not the goods, I believe that Brian Brown could coach up you or I on that team to get to at least 8 wins. I think 8 is like a floor for them. 7, 8 is like a floor for them. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think Louisville down at down at 6 is a little interesting, but we'll see. We'll see ultimately. I will say this. Miami is the preseason national champs every year. They in the preseason, they're going to win it all every year. The ACC is theirs. This is the year they come back. This is the year that I'm sorry to tell you, Ed Reed and Ray Lewis aren't walking through that door. I'm sorry to tell you. Okay.
Cam Ward and Kiko Maui Noah are walking through that door. These are fine players. Ruben Bain.
Listen, I'd love to. What did they used to say on X-Files all the time? I want to believe. I want to believe in Miami. I do, Donno. I really do. I really do. I grew up, my teams in the South, because Michigan was always my actual team, but my teams in the South were always Miami and Florida State. I loved those games. I loved watching them play. I loved everything about it. I struggle to believe in Miami every year, because every year is supposed to be, they've got all the pieces. And it's like, well, I got to see it. I got to see you show me something. And I think that Miami is going to show us the problem that I was talking about on the other end of Clemson, where your main guys you've got a few too many portal guys at those key positions, where it's like, y'all need to adjust right away. You're going to be running meshes out of the read option with a quarterback and running back who just got here. And it sounds like a small deal because you're like, these guys are almost professionals. They can do that. These guys have to deal with school and sport. These guys have a unique band of things they got to deal with. And again, what is the culture at Miami is the biggest question. What is established as this is who we are. This is what we put our hat on. Because you want to say power running, but have you actually seen them be that good at that? You want to say, hey, they hang their hats on having a defense that's lights out, but you and I can both agree on this at minimum. Miami's defense may be the sore spot this year. So where do they hang their hat?
Yeah.
And what is the culture? Two things that you got questions about.
I mean, I think they hang their hat on the line of scrimmage on both sides of the football. When you talk about the defense, I think the area that I worry about a little bit that could be soft if certain young players don't step up is the defensive secondary. I think the front 7 on paper is in really good shape. The defensive line is one of the deeper groups in the ACC, just in that part of the defense. The offensive line, same deal there. So I think you go back to what Mario Cristobal identities have been going back to his previous stops. It's always been line of scrimmage, and then you hope that you have the piece in Cam Ward at quarterback that can try to bridge the gap to some of the other stuff. But listen, I'm fully, as a Miami guy, I am fully in the camp of I need to see it to believe it. So I'm fully a lot of what you said I agree with. Now I do think what you're saying about if you're arguing with the power, it's not like the power ranking has them at number 1. I think if they had Miami at number 1, then I could say, okay, let me take a step back. They got to earn it. I think number 3 is a reasonable spot. And I say that even though, I know NC State at number 4, that's a team that beat Miami last year. Like, I get that. So I think Miami's roster is dramatically better than it was a season ago, and not having, a human interception playing quarterback is hopefully going to make a difference as long as Ward can keep his fumbling down. So I understand that. We're going to have a lot more to get to this week on Locked On ACC. So you make sure you subscribe. Hit that subscribe button, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to the audio version, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your pods. He is Kenton Gibbs. You can check him out on Locked On Wolfpack. I am Alex Donno. You can check me out at Locked On Canes. And we will talk to you again next time on another episode of Locked On ACC, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.